Tucson voters are being asked to raise the sales tax to pay for preschool and for the zoo.
This will change the community.
We're basically against all sales tax increases.
And a proposal to give University High School its own campus.
Rincon and UHS are overcrowded at one site.
This is Metro Week. Hi, I'm Vanessa Barchfield. Welcome to the show. This week, we're looking at the major propositions on November's ballot. We'll also check in on a program that's bringing prairie dogs back to southern Arizona. That and much more after a look at the week's top stories from the Arizona Public Media Newsroom.
Arizona's unemployment rate dropped to 4.7% in September, the lowest mark in almost 10 years. The rate dropped from 5% in August. State economists say wages are going up across Arizona, and that's bringing more people into the workforce. The State Office of Economic Opportunity says Arizona's economy added more than 36,000 non-farm jobs in September, surpassing the post-recessionary average gain of about 28,000 jobs. The office says the government sector added 26,000 jobs. In all, 8 of 11 sectors added jobs. A survey of the endangered Mount Graham red squirrel found only 35 of the animals on the mountain. The squirrel's habitat on Mount Graham was largely destroyed by the Fry Fire this summer. Last year, the annual survey found more than 250 red squirrels. Biologists say they believe some of the squirrels fled to other parts of Mount Graham. They plan on doing a full mountain survey early next year. Wildlife managers say they do plan a supplemental feeding for the squirrels this winter since their food supply was destroyed in the fire. And the 5 Democrats trying to unseat Republican incumbent Martha McSally next year raised a combined $500,000 during the last 3 months. McSally raised $950,000. For more on all of these stories, you can always visit our website.
Proposition 204 would raise the city sales tax by half a penny on each dollar to pay for up to 8,000 kids to attend preschool. Organizers call the measure Strong Start Tucson.
Several years ago, the Arizona legislature basically got rid of all subsidies for child care for working families. And despite years of effort to restore that, nothing was happening. So we decided we needed to do something for Tucson's children, and we put our heads together, and the idea of Strong Start Tucson was born.
If the measure passes, 3- and 4-year-olds within the city limits will be eligible for scholarships for high-quality preschool.
Children who have high-quality preschool have 3 times the high school graduation rate. They attend 4-year colleges at 2 to 3 times more. They have half the dependence in their later life on any kind of public welfare, and they have higher earnings, better health. The effects last through their lifetime, so long as it's high quality.
But right now, not many kids here go to preschool. Jack says of the 14,000 3- and 4-year-olds within the city limits, just about 14% attend high-quality preschool.
So if we could give scholarships to another 6,000 or 8,000 kids, that would really be a game changer for Tucson.
So if it passes, how much will the tax cost the average Tucsonan?
It's $36 a year or $3 a month, so it's pennies. Another way to think about it is it's 1 penny on a $2 ice cream cone.
Tucson's business community has come out in strong opposition to the measure.
Today we're here to announce the formal opposition to Proposition 204.
Members of the opposition include the Tucson Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, the Tucson Metro Chamber of Commerce, and the Southern Arizona Leadership Council, or SALC.
Bottom line is we think the initiative was poorly written and it's bad. SLC has been a long-time supporter of early childhood education and education in general. We focus on P20 to try to address the entire spectrum of education to create a quality workforce in Arizona and to better all of our community and our citizens. But this initiative is just not defined well, and it's at a scale that is so large that I don't believe they have the capacity to execute it.
It's estimated that if Prop 204 passes, it would raise $50 million a year. Maxwell says there aren't enough spaces in high-quality preschools right now in order to spend all of that money. And Jack says, yeah, he's right.
If 8,000 children walked in the door tomorrow, capacity would really be a problem. But Public schools, child care centers are dying to expand their offerings. A lot of child care centers closed down after the big cuts in state aid. They're eager to get back into the market, but there hasn't been a paying customer, a child with a scholarship. Once those kids come with money, the market will solve this problem.
There's no way of guaranteeing that. And if the money's not spent, it is fenced, which in theory is a good idea. However, it's not being spent. And if it's not going to be spent for the course of 3 or 4 years while they're trying to build this capacity, if it can be built, then taxpayer funds are sitting idle.
Now, the idea behind using a sales tax to fund preschool is not new. Voters in Denver and San Antonio passed similar measures,
which both started with 1/8 cent sales tax. And Denver, I would call a success. They started at 1/8 of a cent with a 10-year sunset. Prop 204 doesn't have a sunset. It is in perpetuity.
The reason there's no sunset is because there's no sunset on having children. I don't see Tucsonans stopping having 3- and 4-year-olds. On the day there's no more 3- and 4-year-olds, that's the day to repeal Strong Start Tucson.
Another objection is that the proposition lacks specificity about basically everything, including about how scholarships will be given out. The measure does specify, though, that the scholarship fund will be administered by a commission appointed by the mayor and city council.
The makeup of the commission specifically defines that there needs to be early education experts, minimum of 2, as well as early education providers on a 7-person commission. So if there's 2 experts or advocates, and there's 2 providers, that would be a majority members of the commission who are vested in ensuring that this is successful. Everybody goes, well, that's not a bad idea. Don't you want somebody to make it successful? Yes. However, if you don't have the capacity to expend the funds, and there are no measurements for what accountability, for what is success, there's no measurements of the standards, they're not defined. You'll hear people say what they're going to be, but none of it is defined in the initiative. So they are going to be encouraged to use that money to prove that it's successful, and therefore it may lead it to be being used inefficiently and ineffectively.
It is very poor legislative policy to write specifics of that kind, dollar amounts, specific standards into legislation. That's what a regulatory body is for. And that is what the Strong Start Commission will be doing, regulatory duties.
Another objection is that only kids within the Tucson city limits would be eligible for scholarships.
There's not a single school district in our region that has 100% of its students inside the city boundaries. Therefore, individuals like State Representative Daniel Hernandez, a member of the Sunnyside School Board, has come out openly and publicly against Proposition 204. He does not believe it will help the Sunnyside Schools District's ability to educate their children.
Once again, Jax says there was a reason for sticking just to Tucson rather than opening the measure up to all of Pima County.
When you look at the voting records of the county, they are not good on education measures. Tucson votes yes for education, and we said, okay, let's do it where we can win. In my better world, we'd have it for the whole state, but that's not happening. And the argument that says no children should have it because not every child should seems to me a very foolish one.
Maxwell says he'd like to support a measure that pays for preschool, but Prop 204 is not the one.
If you look at the initiatives that passed in Denver and in San Antonio, they had support of the mayor and council in both of those cities, and there was a broad base of support and collaboration done to include the business community before it hit the ballot. Did not happen here with Strong Start. Are their intentions good? Absolutely. It's just the initiative that they've put on the table for the voters to consider is not good.
We wanted to move the whole dial, and so that if you make a little difference, it's great for an individual child. It's not going to change a community. This will change the community.
Voters have another decision to make on a sales tax. This one would pay for improvements at the Reed Park Zoo. Propositions 202 and 203 go hand in hand. If approved, they'll raise the city sales tax by 1/10 cent on each dollar. That's compared to Prop 204's 1/2 cent on each dollar. So while Penelope Jax of Strong Start Tucson says the Prop 204 sales tax would cost 1 penny on a $2 ice cream cone, Nancy Kluge from the Tucson Zoological Society says this tax would equal 1 penny on a $10 pizza.
And it'll cost the average person in Tucson 60 cents a month. It will raise between $8 and $10 million for the zoo for a period of 10 years.
That's $8 to $10 million each year over the next decade. After that, the tax would sunset. Kluge says the money will pay for much-needed infrastructure improvements at the zoo.
A major sewer line down the center of the zoo, water pipes that break all the time, guardrails that are rusted through, so those kinds of boring things.
But that's not all. The money would also be used to fund a master plan.
That's exciting, that's vibrant, that has things like tigers crossing overhead trails of visitors, that gives our animals more space, that brings hippos, something Tucsonans have been requesting for a long time. Sales tax isn't something that people go, hooray, automatically. But the end result of what could happen is something that our community will say hooray about.
The Pima County Republican Party is the major opponent to Propositions 202 and 203.
We're basically against all sales tax increases. If those pass and then 204 were to pass, we'd be over 9%, headed down the road towards a 10% sales tax in Tucson, one of the poorest large cities in the United States, with a 9.5%, say, sales tax rate. It's just a terrible burden on our city and our residents.
What we've seen is that Tucsonans are very generous, and they understand how a small investment that brings something really great and wonderful to Tucson is worth it. And so I believe in Tucson, and I think Tucsonans will see the value in that.
Eppiheimer says Tucsonans are getting tired of being asked to raise their taxes after already passing Prop 101 earlier this year to pay for road work and equipment for the fire and police departments.
We maintain that all of these sales tax increases are basically unnecessary. Our city spends money wastefully on their own priorities.
He says the Republican Party's opposition is about the tax, not the zoo.
We love the animals. I love the zoo. When I have out-of-town visitors in to visit, we take them to the zoo. We love the zoo. But we think that the zoo, the people that patronize the zoo and love the zoo, like myself, ought to take on the burden and pay for the support of the zoo. Raise the entry price.
The zoo is here to be a resource for Tucson, so we want to make sure it's affordable. We have over 500,000 guests each year, and we want to make sure that we are that resource for Tucson, that teachers can bring their school kids here on field trips, and that all those opportunities for families to come and enjoy is affordable.
It's an asset to the city. I think that that's true. But I think you also have to take into account that this sales tax increase is never planned to do what's needed to be done. The figures I heard were this is going to raise about $65 million in additional funds. But what's needed to bring the zoo up to par and do the job is closer to $100 million. So this is just a stopgap.
Nancy Kluge disagrees. She says again that the tax would raise between $80 and $100 million, and the zoo will be working to raise even more money than that.
It is also combined with private fundraising. So the Zoological Society has committed to raise $15 million over that 10 years in conjunction with the public funding. I think that's important.
And she says there will be other benefits as well.
This brings jobs to Tucson. It's construction. It's also tourism development. So our board has come up with items that would only be found, this would be the only zoo in the western United States that would have some of these features, like a rhino feeding experience. So the tourism component for businesses that serve tourists, for hotels, restaurants, as this zoo could become truly a destination.
Eppiheimer says if it passes, the tax will be bad for Tucson.
It would put us in the top 20 cities in the United States of any size in terms of a sales tax rate. This is not good for Tucson. These sales tax increases are not what's good for the future of our city.
There are a few other measures on this November's ballot. Here's a quick rundown. Right now, Tucson pays its mayor an annual salary of $42,000. Each member of the city council gets $24,000 a year. Proposition 406 would raise their pay. A yes vote will increase the mayor's salary to $69,300 a year, and members of the city council will be paid $39,600 annually. Both the Flowing Wells and Tucson Unified School Districts are asking to be allowed to sell bonds to raise money for buildings, vehicles, and school supplies. Proposition 455 would give the Flowing Wells Unified School District the ability to sell almost $24 million in bonds. And in Proposition 458, TUSD would raise $180 million through bonds. Proposition 456 would give Marana Unified School District a 13% budget override continuation, while Proposition 457 would authorize a 12% budget override for the Sunnyside Unified School District. Mail-in ballots went out last week and need to be sent back by November 1st. The election is November 7th. Tucson Unified School District is considering a proposal to give University High its own campus. Students at Catalina would be moved to Rincon, and UHS would take over the Catalina campus. Emily Morrison is a Catalina alumna who opposes the proposal. She came into our studios along with TUSD board member Mark Stegeman, who's been a longtime supporter of moving UHS away from Rincon.
Rincon and UHS are overcrowded at one site. We have 4 high schools with a lot of excess capacity, and then we have 2 jammed together on a site not built for that. So I think it'll help both of them.
So the current proposal is, of course, to move University High School students to Catalina and move the Catalina students over to Rincon. Why is that the solution that makes the most sense?
Well, it's only a proposal, so we'll see whether, after we get into the next stage, whether people still think it makes sense. I think that was because the Catalina site is the smallest high school site, and so UHS would fit into there well. And the Catalina and Rincon populations would be about 1,800 and fit into the larger site pretty well. So that was part of it. I think Catalina has struggled over the years. And I think Rincon's had its struggles too. I think putting them together, if we do it right, can make a stronger school.
And Emily, you wrote in a letter to the editor last week that you do support UHS getting its own campus.
Absolutely.
But you don't want Catalina to be sacrificed in that. What do you think the solution is?
Well, I think only moving one school, disrupting students from only one school would make a whole lot more sense to me. One of the things, of course, as a graduate and a stakeholder in this, I think Catalina High School is an iconic building. It was built for Catalina High School, and we are more than just students to shift about and set somewhere else. So if university were to stay at Rincon, where they are, and expand there, and we would welcome the Rincon students because there, as Mark pointed out, there's room. But there's also room, I feel, because there's been so many cuts that the programs aren't there to attract students in an open enrollment district.
So what do you think needs to be done in order to sort of help Catalina also? I mean, is it a question of more resources?
Well, if you are given a choice as a parent and a student where to go to school in this open enrollment district, you will go where the programs are. And so if they cut the programs and things like our aviation, which was thriving, for whatever reason, and a board member would know better than I, it's not there anymore. So anybody who might have wanted that doesn't choose to go there. But I do agree that this is University High School is a wonderful school, and it would be great. And of course, the legislature doesn't give you the money to build another school. So we would welcome the Rincon kids, I think. There's no plan yet. I have to tell you that we didn't even know about this. So the people at Catalina and the foundation and others have not developed any kind of plan to propose to you. My own personal feeling is, why don't they stay at Rincon and send just one student body over?
And is that a possibility? Is that a proposal that's been
considered?
Well,
that was one of the proposals that's floated around for a long time, is to shut Rincon. You know, any school closure was going to cause problems and a lot of heartbreak for a lot of people. And if it had come forward to suggest closing Rincon, we'd be having this discussion with Rincon. They don't want to be dislodged either. So I think the UHS folks who worked on this were fairly impartial between those options. Santa Rita was another option. Even Palo Verde could have been an option. But I think the size of Catalina works. The size of Rincon works. If all the Rincon students went to Catalina, it would be over the site's capacity. So I think the site sizes work pretty well. It was not a secret process. We voted as a board to start this process in May, and everybody knew that. That was a public vote. And I never heard any complaints about the process until the result came out. And then, of course, people were concerned. But the most important point is it's not a decision. It's a proposal, and we'll get deeper into it. And if there are strong arguments against it, if it doesn't look good, then we won't do it.
And can you respond a little bit to the point about programs being dropped from Catalina High School?
I don't think Catalina has been well served over the years. I think you could say the same thing for at least a couple other high schools. I think that's fair. But we are in a situation now where we have to figure out what's the best option for both sets of students. There are a lot of courses that Rincon offers that Catalina doesn't offer. And I think Catalina students, by going to a school more than twice the size, will get a lot of benefit. If we do it right, we have to work hard on the transition. We want to do a transition so that the students who are there in 2 years aren't looking back, but are happy where they are. And that's going to take a lot of work, but I think we can do it.
The current student population at Catalina is about 740 students. Mm-hmm. I believe the capacity is about 1,500.
That's about 50%.
Why has the student body dropped so low?
Well, we have 4 high schools that are very under-enrolled, 4 of our 10 high schools. And I think we've suffered from competition with charter schools, from competition with BASIS, Northern Science Academy, and TOSD has not run all of its high schools as well as it should have. And I've been on the board for a few years, and I'll take my share of accountability, although I've tried to do what I can, and I've disagreed with some of the decisions about Catalina. So I think it reflects that we haven't done as well as we should in some ways, and I think this is an opportunity with a large student population to really commit ourselves to doing better at the combined school.
Emily, of course, you've noted that Catalina has a large refugee population. What effect do you think that would have, moving those students, what effect would that have on them?
Well, I have a personal connection with a student who received a bloody handprint on her door for her father, and he said, "You have 48 hours to get out of Baghdad." And so she had to leave. So then they had to go to Turkey to get vetted, and that's the way the State Department works before you can come here. So when you're talking refugee, you're not talking just a strange student from another country. You're talking about somebody who's been in a war-torn situation. They've already been uprooted a number of times, probably. They, for years, were placed at about Dodge and Grant Road, and the kids could walk. So my concern is, for some compassion, some caring for these students who have already been uprooted. They can now walk. If they were sent to Rincon, it would be a couple of bus transfers or whatever, and a whole new situation again. So if you leave them at Catalina, and when I attended, I was in a class of 480. There were 2,000 students at Catalina, and we were managing. We were the University High School of 1960 because we had all the programs. We had the good traditions. We had the kinds of things that a parent would want.
And Mark, I want to talk a little bit about the process. How, going forward from this point on, how are the interests specifically of Rincon and Catalina students being taken into consideration?
Well, Emily's right. The Catalina students are the ones who are being uprooted, and there is a lot of refugee population there. It might be, in some sense, the most diverse student body among all our high schools, although Rincon has a pretty big mixture too. And so we need to be, of course, we need to think carefully about the bus transportation. I don't think from that neighborhood to Rincon necessarily is a transfer. It's not that far, but I think we need to provide a lot of counseling services, a lot of support, and help those kids make the transition smoothly, and that includes transportation support. But I think that with a much larger student body, much more resources, and I expect that the board will be willing to put in some extra resources, more resources even than just come from Catalina, to make the transition work. I'm hoping that in a couple of years they'll feel they're better off.
The school board's in the very early stage of studying the proposal. If they decide to go ahead, the earliest UHS would move would be fall 2018. Pima County and the Arizona Game and Fish Department have been working to restore a population of prairie dogs in southern Arizona. We went to a recent release of the animals to find out why.
Prairie dogs are an important part of grassland habitats and have been lost pretty much across the West.
There are two types of prairie dogs that used to be common in Arizona: the Gunnisons, which are found up north, and the black-tailed prairie dogs, which lived in the grasslands in southern Arizona.
A lot of the early ranching community found them controversial.
They saw their burrows and logically thought that their cattle might break their legs in their burrows, but we have never had documentation of that. If it does occur, it's a very limited thing that happens. So what we're finding now is that the good of this animal well outweighs what people thought were the bad. And the bad led to mass poisonings and shootings of them, which eventually led them to be completely extirpated from the state.
Arizona was the only state that was successful in actually eradicating all of their black-tailed prairie dogs.
That had some pretty serious impacts on the environment.
Prairie dogs are generally known as keystone species, and they get that name because typically the environment will change when you take that animal out of a system.
Whenever you remove the keystone species, then you remove a lot of other things that depend on them. For example, black-tailed prairie dogs are a big prey source for golden eagles, ferruginous hawks, American badgers.
They're known as ecosystem engineers as well. They do a lot of work to keep the grasslands healthy, so they're constantly clipping grasses. And so yes, you will notice that there is definitely less grass that appears available here, but the nutritional content of it is going to be a lot higher since it's constantly being recycled. And that also comes from the soils, which with their digging, they're constantly digging at the ground and recycling those nutrients in the soil as well. Their burrows also allow water to penetrate back into the aquifers, and so you have these tunnels that'll go, upwards of 12 feet down on the ground, so it can allow water to penetrate back in the ground.
Conservation organizations, agencies have been working hard to bring them back. And that's what we're here for today, as we're reintroducing about 94 prairie dogs back into this habitat.
This is the third release of black-tailed prairie dogs into this area since 2008. The animals that are being moved here today were captured over the last few weeks from southern New Mexico.
We are trying to stay as genetically similar as possible to what was here historically.
Now, these animals look a little freaked out, but a lot of care has been put into making sure that all of the animals are healthy and that they are moved with their family groups.
The family groups is what we call coteries. Usually has one top male, a couple of females, and then the young of the year, so any babies that they've had that year and may even stay into the second year. And so they can be anywhere from 3 to 5 individuals up to 15 to 20.
Most of these coteries are made up of about 4 prairie dogs. When it's time, people put on thick leather gloves to protect them from the prairie dog's bites, and they pull the animals from their cage to move them into their new homes.
They live below ground. They need to have that safe, secure setting below ground. You can't just release them above ground and expect them to survive. It's not going to happen. So you need to have some protected area from predators for them. So what we've done here is we excavated down about 6-7 feet underground, and we put an artificial burrow below ground. And so that will at least give them, the stable temperatures and protection from predators that they need. It's very grassroots, but at least it gives them the basics. Then to encourage them to stay, we put on top of these artificial cages on top. And again, some of them may want to try to find where they came from, want to go home. And so we put these on top for 2 weeks, providing food and water for them the entire time. Once they start digging, it kind of encourages them to stay. They're already kind of building their homes by doing that digging behavior.
All of the prairie dogs here today made it into their makeshift burrows, but not all of them will survive.
It's tough being a prairie dog when all other animals find you delicious. I imagine a couple of them might get picked off in the process.
Anytime you reintroduce wildlife, it's a challenge, and so you're going to have high, low points along the way.
And these guys have a lot of work ahead of them, work that's essential for reestablishing the population here.
They have to rebuild the town that they live in. And so it'll take a couple of years for them to get everything built and then to start seeing the recruitment. They'll start having babies and having enough of them that'll replace the ones that might be picked off by predators over the year. And so it takes a couple of years to get to that point. So most likely next year we'll have to come in and augment the site with a few additional animals.
So why is this prairie dog population such a priority for the county and for Game and Fish?
This is a priority because the species on a whole isn't doing so great. and we want to help before it gets to a listing status. We don't want it listed as endangered or threatened. We want to fix it before it even gets there.
Game and Fish says most of the prairie dogs have already dug out of their artificial burrows and are creating tunnels of their own. That's our show. Next week, a look at development on the west side. Thanks so much for watching.